All right. Hi, everybody. Can you hear me? Okay, sorry about the delay. We had multiple links going on, so I'm going to get us set up in council chambers real quick.
This meeting to order.
Sorry.
And we will start with attendance. Okay, so please say here if you are here, otherwise we will take your silence as your response. Christina Carney.
Here.
Trina Feldman.
Here.
Jessica Gates. Kurt Schwiegert.
It's Schweigert. Yes, I'm here.
Sorry, Schweigert. Thank you. Shannon Stott. Here. Jennifer Strickland.
Here.
Aaron Smith here. All right. So we are having a joint meeting with the transportation group. Looking forward to this conversation today. So we're just working off of the joint agenda today. Is that correct? We're not doing any like minute approval or
Nope.
any of those types
None of that until next meeting.
Okay, great. Just verifying. Sorry, I'm home with my 4-year-old today, which is why I'm not there in person. So there's a good chance there will be interruptions. Shannon, did you have a question?
Yes, I am taking minute notes. Am I not? Or am I not for this meeting?
I think for this meeting, staff can do the minutes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Also, sorry, Jessica is here. I just saw in the Q&A. So we will count her as attending, and I need to make her a panelist real quick.
Thank you.
Okay.
So sorry about that.
Yeah, sorry.
So I suppose we should give an opportunity for our guests to introduce themselves.
Sounds good.
Want to start, John, or somebody on Zoom want to start?
No, I can start since I think our microphone is unmuted.
Okay.
If you can see me way back here, I'm John Bosket with DKS Associates, and I'm the project manager for the consultant team leading the transportation system plan update for Estacada and in cooperation with ODOT.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, go ahead, Brandy.
Kaylin, do you want to start?
Sure. I'm Kaylin Schmolt. I'm with JLA Public Involvement, and I'm going to be working with Brandy and John conducting the public outreach process, developing the public engagement plan. This meeting is Brandy's to lead. I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brandy Steffen with JLA Public Involvement. And as mentioned, I'm just here to help facilitate the conversation with you all and make sure that we are conscious of your time and thankful for you all spending your time here to learn about the transportation system plan and how we can help get your input as well as others from the community. So yeah. Are there others that we need to introduce?
Should we introduce Mara?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. This is Melanie. I don't know if you can see me from so far away. Hello, Melanie Wagner. And I want to introduce Mara, who is our Community Development Coordinator, and this is her first day, so she's here to observe, and we're getting her up and running with a lot of information. And do you want to, I guess, just say hello and anything else you might want to say?
Yes, hello. I don't know what else I have to say, but that I'm very happy to be here.
Right, and then we have Taylor.
And yeah,
And-
Taylor can't be, I'm here off screen. Sorry about that. I'm doing Zoom logistics.
And Elena.
Elena Turpin. Hi, I think you all know me by now.
Yeah, I've met her.
Great. So just, we all have the agenda, and just to go over again, the meeting goals, they are to meet the project team and learn about the TSP. So we've met the project team. We are really productive today, y'all. And the second goal is to develop a shared understanding of how an equity lens can be applied to the TSP process and project outcomes. So I'm going to let you all take over, and we'll just sit back and learn from you and participate.
Before we do that, is there anybody in the waiting room for public comment? Nope, okay. Then Brandy or John
Great.
or whoever is next, take it away.
Great. Well, thank you for just clarifying that, Erin, about the meeting goals. You're right. And what we're going to do is at each point along the agenda, we're going to pause for questions. We'll have like a brief introduction, and then we'll get into some conversation. So the majority of our time will be spent around applying the equity lens. And so I will probably go around and just call on each of you if you have comments or questions, so that we make sure we hear from all of you. So just be prepared for that as I call on you all. But apart from that, I think I'll just be making sure that we're going on time. And if there are any issues that come up, I think that we can make sure that we resolve them in an agreeable way, make sure that everyone's heard. I'm sure you all have some ground rules that are in existence. And so we'll just be making sure that we're collecting all comments, even if they don't necessarily apply to this particular process. We'll kind of put them in what we call a parking lot, so we can flag those and keep track of them, even if they're not specific to this meeting. So feel free to raise anything during the meeting. Don't worry about wondering if it's directly applicable. We can figure that out for you. So anything else, Kaylin or John, that you want to add, or anyone from the city before we get started?
Nope.
Doesn't look like it. Go ahead.
Okay. Great. So John, I will hand it off to you. And I think, we're just really hoping to hear from all of the DEI committee, and thanks again for your time as we head into this. So I think John's going to tell us what a TSP is.
All right, now we get to find out who's got the PowerPoint loaded up here.
I have it. If you just want to, or do you
Yes.
have it there?
I don't think we've got it loaded. If you've got it, please pull it up. That would
If
be
you
the
could-
fastest.
If you could screen share it, Kaylin, that would
Yes.
be very helpful.
It says that I'm disabled. I have a host disabled my screen sharing.
We have power issues here. Who's in control?
How about now?
Yes, thank you. All right. All right, can everybody see this?
Yep.
All
Okay.
right, it should be on slide 3 is where I'm starting. So I'm just going to give you a 10-minute or so kind of overview explaining what the transportation system update project is about, kind of covering these topics I've got listed on the slide there. Just what is a TSP? Why are they important? What do they typically include? And then a little bit about Estacade's TSP update process specifically. Next slide. So in short, the transportation system plan, it's an extension of your comprehensive plan. So it acts as the transportation element. If you've spent a lot of time looking at the city's comprehensive plan, imagine if you look in the transportation section, you're going to just see some very high level policies where so the TSP can get into a lot more specifics and more detail than the comprehensive plan does. And this is a long range plan. So we're looking out typically 20 years. So we're not only want to understand what works well or what doesn't today, but then how is another 20 years of growth maybe going to change the needs of the community? So you can plan accordingly. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So several reasons why they're important. One is all of your kind of partnering agencies do similar planning. So the state does, long range transportation planning, the county, the city's got theirs. I mean, even, state parks, another agency, they do long range planning. And so obviously it's beneficial for everyone if those plans are coordinated. So, money's being spent wisely, and hopefully that everyone's plans are compatible for how they plan to grow in the future. And so through this process, all of those coordinating agencies will be participating to help us keep our planning coordinated. And also, as you may have noticed, as growth happens over time, you've had a lot of new subdivisions come in specifically. You need to know where you need your transportation services built before something gets built in that place. And also how you want the transportation system to be built to support your future growth. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. And so hopefully if you've done these things well, that should provide a basis for better investment decisions. So not only do you know what you need, but what your priorities are and how you should be spending first, and making sure you're preserving appropriate rights of way to get what you need in the future. And it certainly makes you more competitive for any kind of funding in the future. If you're applying for any kind of state or federal grants for transportation funding, if that project is not in an adopted TSP, you've got almost no shot at getting that. It's more or less a pass-fail criteria. Next slide. And then, as I kind of touched on, is also you want to make sure that as you're investing in your transportation system, you're doing it in a way that's helping you achieve your broader community goals as well. And most communities, as they're doing their transportation system plans, they have more or less the same topics of interest that end up showing up as their overarching goals, but they might have different priorities amongst those. And so, some things are very transportation focused, others are maybe, more just kind of tangentially. But, you want to make sure that we are aware of those, and I think kind of prioritizing and investing appropriately. Let's go ahead and go to the next slide. So what do they typically include? A key piece of this is the goals and objectives, which is something that we'll be getting to soon, I think, in the next time we get together. And, again, kind of looking at that slide I had before, that's where we're kind of talking about what are kind of the overarching things that are important to the community that we want to accomplish with our transportation system. And we use those not only to guide the development of the plan, but then as we start recommending solutions and projects and programs, we use that as evaluation criteria to tell us how well we're doing. And if we need to adjust priorities in the plan, or are we missing something entirely? And so that's something we'll do early in the process and we'll use throughout the process. And then you'll see different modal plans, and I have slides getting into a little bit more detail in these smaller circles. So you'll see different modal plans for the major modes of transportation, walking, biking, transit, motor vehicle, as well as standards, which aren't really projects or programs, but they're more guidance and policies that make sure you're managing your system appropriately or designing it the way you intended to. There's also discussions on funding, and usually you need to do some kind of policy and code amendments to make sure you can implement the new TSP. So go ahead to the next slide. So again, on those modal plans, if you haven't looked at the city's transportation system plan recently, it's very easy to find if you go online and start searching. So under each of those major modes of transportation, you'll certainly see, project needs. Those could be, entirely new facilities, like there are some, new corridors where, streets that obviously would include, bike facilities, walking facilities may go. But there can also be improvements to existing corridors and existing streets. Maybe they're just not kind of a design to accommodate the different modes of transportation as the community would like. So you want to change something. But also there could be programs like, educational and outreach programs, to complement the list of projects. Next slide. And on the standards, again, that can cover a range of things like, street design standards. So you see in the picture in the upper right corner, to say for different, types of streets, how big or how small do you want them and how do you want to use that space? How many feet do you want to dedicate for cars versus people walking versus people biking? Do you want bikes on the street or do you want them behind the curb? Do you want planter strips or not for certain types of streets? Should we allow on-street parking? Things like that. So, so when you're building improvements, or this really comes into play a lot, especially with new development. If they have to build a piece of a new street, they need to know what it is supposed to look like. And then things like street connectivity requirements, to make sure you're not dead ending a bunch of local streets, especially as new subdivisions come in, which can lengthens vehicle miles traveled and it's worse for emergency response. And it has a lot of impact on people walking and biking because it makes their trips a lot longer if there's a lot of added direction travel. Even standards to limit congestion. So, the community can more or less define, how much congestion they are willing to tolerate versus, at what point they want to build more capacity. And even guidance for things like neighborhood traffic management, which, is traffic calming in short. So, guidance on different types of tools to use to deal with problems when you've got neighborhoods where you maybe have too much cut through traffic or traffic speeding through residential areas. Next slide, please. And then I mentioned funding as part of this. We're going to have a bunch of projects and we're going to have some, rough planning level estimates for how much these projects cost. And we are also going to look at transportation funding, kind of projecting based on what you've had in the past and what revenue sources you use for transportation projects, how much do we think you're going to have over that 20-year period. And we'll compare those. And 9.9 out of 10 times, you're never going to have enough money to pay for all of those projects. The disparity will be huge. So don't be alarmed. Prepare yourself now. That's normal. But it does mean that you're definitely going to have to prioritize and know which projects are the most important for the community. And also it usually kind of triggers a conversation locally about transportation funding. And does the city want to do something differently to generate more revenue than they currently are? So go ahead, the next slide, which I think is my last one. And so about the TSP update process specifically, this is our kind of our simplified project schedule on the slide here. So it's about an 18-month schedule, I think. And it's kind of split into 3 different major sections. So from now through about mid-fall, so we call kind of the understand phase. So, this is where we're really, again, talking about what the community's interests are for transportation. Again, those goals and objectives and what do we want to accomplish, as well as, talking with those other agencies about their planning efforts, right? And remember, we need to coordinate those. We want to know what they're intending to do and how we can help each other. And then also just evaluating the current transportation system, understanding what it does well and maybe what it doesn't. And then as we shift into the evaluate stage, That's where we start to develop some solutions, some the projects and the programs, and kind of go through a process of refining those with community input. As we'll talk about also, right, using the equity lens to help evaluate, what are the outcomes look like for everybody. And then the last stage is the recommended adopt. So hopefully we've got everything kind of refined and ready to go. And so we put it into a plan and go through the public hearings process. And below the big boxes there, we see a bunch of circles and a few diamonds. That's kind of a simplified look at the public involvement process through that. We're going to have a project website or web page on the city's website. They'll be available soon, which is where people can get signed up for the mailing list and see the project documents and what's going on with the project, so they can get plugged in. And then you'll see the S's with these circles. That's our stakeholder group. So they're kind of our main recommendation body. It's a mix of public agency and community representatives. And the D with the circle, that is you. That's the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee. And the C with the circle in it, we have some city council briefings along the way. And the yellow diamonds with the W's, those are our community workshops, which will be both an in-person and online participation opportunity. So as you can see through the process in the understand phase, we have, in addition to this, which is the first D with the circle, we've kind of got two series of check-in meetings with these groups. So we'll actually meet first, I believe, with this group, and then we'll take the input to the stakeholder group that we get from this group, which again, they're them being kind of a recommendation body. And then we'll report back to city council, to let them know what folks are saying and where we are in the process and get their input. And so I get that first kind of column of circles. It's largely going to be talking about those goals and objectives. And then at that second series, it's where we've got our evaluation of kind of what's maybe working well and what's not, and getting folks input on that as far as maybe just confirming what we're seeing or telling us if there's some gaps or barriers that we missed, so we can incorporate that in. And so then that first W there, that's largely what that open house effort will be about. We'll be kind of presenting and getting feedback on all of that, the goals and objectives, and kind of what we're seeing are the needs. And then the second, when we get into the evaluate stage, we've got a check-in with our stakeholder group and another workshop to talk about what those recommendations are. Then the last series is when we've got a draft plan. So before we go into any adoption hearings, getting feedback from that. One thing we could discuss in this meeting is, you see the circles with the D's where you guys are. We only had a limited number of those, but we can say 4 total. And so we don't have one specifically designated when we've got all the draft projects. Certainly as a substitute for that, I would want to get your input through the public open house process. Another option could be, if you wanted to, if you saw more value in moving, let's say one of the earlier Ds to that one, we could do that as well. That would work just as well. We just had a limited number of opportunities for that. So that is how we chose to do it, but we could flex that a little bit based on where you really want to use those. So with that, that was the end of my presentation. I'll take any questions about any of this.
Yeah, any questions about what a transportation system plan is?
I have one question, just thinking about specifically, I don't think parking was mentioned, but I'm sure that's part of the plan. And does that fall under like the motor vehicle portion of the plan?
That would be under the motor vehicle portion. I'm trying to remember if that are the standards, but yes, that would be in there. And most of it, and again, it might be based on STCADA's specific needs. Most of it may be like different types of streets and where it should or shouldn't be allowed.
Thanks.
Looks
I
like
see Trina's hand raised.
Yeah, I have a question on the last one. It has sorry, I've got it half on the TV, half on my phone. Public adoption hearing on the last recommended and adoption. Wouldn't that be a W over there then? Or what is the public adoption hearings?
So technically speaking, any of the S's, well, even these meetings, any of the circles are open to the public. So the public can come. The W's are specifically like public community workshops or open houses. So we'll have an online and an in-person opportunity. And Brandy may be getting into this more. It'll certainly be in the public involvement strategy memo coming up. But generally, we'll come out to the public. So let's say there would be a meeting maybe here in this room where we'd be sharing the information, have some posters, and people can come, and we may be open for a couple of hours where they can come and see stuff. We can do a little presentation, give us their input, but there'll also be an online version of it that'll probably be open for a couple of weeks where they couldn't make it to the in-person version. They can do it through that. So yes, really any of those circles, and certainly the adoption hearings, are open for the public to attend.
I think the big difference, just to add on to that, the big difference in my mind for those are, the primary purpose of the workshop, community workshop, is to hear from, share information with and hear from the general public. Whereas the primary purpose of, all of those little circle meetings are really to hear from specifically those groups more so. And then the adoption hearings, that's, a city council decision and approval process. So a little bit of difference there, but yes, they're all going to be open to the public.
Great. Any other questions? So one question you might have is, well, how does the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee fit into the plan? And so what we've been thinking in, and this is where we want some of your help, and we'll have some questions in an agenda item coming up, is that you all will help us think about which questions to ask, which equity lens questions to ask as we go through both the process, right? So as we think about what outreach we want to do, think about these workshops, who we want to connect with, but then also thinking about those outcomes, as John mentioned, so not only in the understand phase, but then also in that evaluate and recommendation phase. So I was trying to think of an analogy to try to make this easier to understand. I couldn't come up with the perfect one. So if this one doesn't work, let me know. But I was thinking, it's kind of like when you're going on a trip and you're asking some friends like, hey, where do they really like to go on a trip? And that's kind of the process, and you're helping us figure out where to go. But then we're not actually having you build the car to get us there, right? That's part of the technical team's job, is to try to figure out which exact components make up that plan. But then we're going to maybe want your feedback again to say like, hey, look, we took these pictures and this is what came out of the trip. What do you think? What should I put into my photo album at the end? And really like what makes sense at that stage, right? So it's kind of these check-in points to make sure we're moving in the right direction, but you're not actually like building the thing in the process. So hopefully that doesn't make it more confusing. But yeah, any questions with my attempt at an analogy? Okay. Great. Well, I think we can then just move forward. I know Kaylin has the community profile to review, and then we can start thinking about what equity lens questions would apply to the process. So that planning phase or that understand phase that John has there. And then how do we evaluate what comes out at the end?
Great. Thanks, Brandy. Yeah, so one of the early things that we're doing as part of this process is developing a public involvement plan. Sometimes we call it a PIP or a PICP. You'll see those letters around, and I apologize for using them because we really should be calling things what they actually are to help people understand them. But what helps inform the development of that plan is information about the community. And so part of this conversation, I'm really hoping, is that we're going to be able to take some takeaways from this group to understand, do we have the right sense of who Estacada is? And we do this fairly routine analysis, which we call a community profile. Sometimes it's called a demographic analysis. And the purpose of that is, for the sake of the project, you do a demographic analysis to really to make sure that you are not dramatically impacting vulnerable populations. We have to understand which communities are being impacted, specifically minorities and people with lower incomes, people who have less of a voice. And so the way that we typically approach doing this is by using census data, using the American Community Survey. We're using some school district data. And we're using some census tracts for the area around Estacada to try and understand, okay, this is what we think the broader community looks like. And we know that this is not perfect. Not everybody participates in these surveys. It just serves as a kind of a baseline for us to have this conversation, to say, does this sound right to you? Who are we missing? What are we missing? And so that we can kind of develop a baseline understanding, and also so that as we go through the process, we can say, we're not quite meeting the threshold. We're not reaching people of this age group or this ethnic background. So we know that we need to shift gears and adjust how we're doing our outreach. And I'm not going to go into the tables of numbers, but those should all be in the community profile document that I believe you all received, and happy to address specific instances of those. But I'm just going to start with some of the overall takeaways. And what I'd like to hear from you is, does this sound like Estacada to you, or are we missing really significant things? So we look at racial diversity, and based on this data, the area is predominantly white. I don't think that's super surprising. But Latino and Hispanic students make up 13% of the school district. So we're kind of looking to you to say, does that sound like it's the right, do we need to be thinking about doing very specific outreach to Latino and Hispanic groups? We looked at income and education, and while most of the households in the project area have income that's about on par with the state average, it is slightly lower educational level than Oregon as a whole. Looking at age and disability is particularly important for a transportation system plan, because of these are people who may have mobility challenges, and they also may be people who are typically underrepresented when we do outreach. And we have found that according to this data, that some of the areas around Estacada have slightly more residents who are older, and slightly more ambulatory mobility disabilities than the state average. And so I'd like to pause here and just ask, does this sound right? Are there glaring holes in this? Are there glaring generalizations that I've made in putting this into words? How does this sound to you?
I had some questions, just not necessarily pointing out anything, but can you explain the Latino Hispanic population and how that they can make up 13% of the district, but less than 2% of the population?
So yeah, so I am looking at more than just, it's possible that there's nothing necessarily statistically wrong with this, because the population of Estacada is different than the population of the district. So there may be some discrepancies in those numbers. But also based on how the American Community Survey works is that it's a statistical sampling over time. and again, it's spread out. So the census blocks are not necessarily representative of all of the people who use the Estacada transportation system, but we just try and create a buffer around to see who's there. It's also possible that that the school has more accurate numbers than the census does because of the way they administer this, and because of the people who are more likely to respond when somebody says, "I'm here from the government and I have some questions for you." So that's more or less why I think that there's that difference.
Okay, thank you. That helps me understand. And then the other question I had is, do we have any trend lines? Like, are you able to look back and see where some of these takeaways are representing a point in time, but is it demonstrating movement along a longer term trend?
We can do that. We didn't do that for the purpose of this, but that is information that we can absolutely get you. I recently we did this for another project, and there was an appreciable increase in the Hispanic population over these 5-year periods, the 5-year average. So I wouldn't be surprised if we were seeing this increasing, but I'd have to check that and get back to you. So that would be a good question for our circle back with this.
I think that would be interesting for several of these things. Also, when you're looking at income and education, are they going up? Are they, crossing at an X, or just to kind of see where the population has been versus where it looks like it's heading, which might impact the way that we look at transportation needs 20 years into the future.
Sure. Yeah, we can pull some of that information.
Any other questions so far for Kaylin?
Or just confirmation that yes, does anybody have any thoughts on whether or not this sounds fairly accurate in what you would be thinking?
Yeah, and even if it feels accurate, you could do the thumbs up in Zoom. So even if you want to do that, you can do that.
I think it's pretty reasonable from a broader perspective that's representative of Estacada.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so so based off of this, typically when we do is that a comment or is that just feedback? Okay. So typically when we start from information like this, we're developing a plan, an outreach plan, without necessarily the opportunity to talk to a committee yet. They come by later, and and we make adjustments, but we haven't written our public involvement plan yet. And so, as included in the document that was provided to you, we included some possible outreach strategies that we kind of that we would typically use when we look at a demographic profile like this. And so as I go through this, I'm looking to you to think, okay, based off of the makeup of Estacada as a city and of the region, of the people who use your system, are these tools on the right track, and what other tools should we be thinking about for reaching these groups and other groups, generally, because these are some of the groups that are really challenging to reach, which is why we spend more time and we want to put effort into making sure that they're involved, but there are also other groups that we want to make sure that we're involving too. So because of the number of Spanish speakers in the community is not super high, it may not be necessary to provide material translation of everything. We do have limited resources, so we have to be judicious about how we make our investments of time and money. But one thing that we do is we'll often create like a basic information sheet about the project so that there is information that we can give to people. And as part of that, and as part of other outreach materials, we'll try and provide a resource where people who only speak Spanish can request more information about the project. As we we consider trying to reach people of varying incomes and education levels. You know, people who have lower incomes, they often experience more barriers to participation just because they have less flexible work schedules, they have limited availability. Many people have limited availability. And so the strategies that we use, you know, they're just generally good practice. And so, you know, so when we're creating our materials, we're trying to write them in approachable, simple language. That's also useful for if we ever need to have somebody do translation of those materials. When we're doing online engagement tools, we typically try and make sure that our websites are mobile friendly because there are certain populations that only get the internet through their phones. And we also don't want to be over dependent on those online tools because not everybody has internet access, and we need to be careful about, you know, the expectation that people have fast internet access or they need to watch videos or do fancy websites. And then lastly, it's often good practice to try and hold events at inclusive locations. So the city hall might be a good spot, but a better one might be a public school where people are already going, where they feel more comfortable being, and trying to connect with families by connecting with students, which we do have a school-based outreach item in our scope, and we found that to be a really useful way for trying to get a representative cross-section of the community. In terms of reaching people of usually older people, but also younger people, but in Estacada, trying to reach people who are 65 and older or have mobility challenges, we will, as part of our outreach process, we'll try and track how people get around, track people's ages, ask them whether they have mobility challenges, so that we understand whether we are reaching those people. And where necessary, we can make special contacts with assisted living facilities or use senior services, contact senior services and try and distribute hard copy materials. Sometimes people don't want to participate or don't have the ability to participate online. So we want to provide a variety of outreach opportunities and feedback opportunities. And then it's always good practice to hold our events in accessible locations so that people don't have to go up a flight of stairs or walk great distances in order to attend. So pausing again before we go on, does this seem like a good foundation? And who else are we missing? You know, are there or what other outreach tools should we consider that maybe you've seen somewhere else or that has worked really well in Estacada in the past? I'd love to get your feedback.
Everybody's got a case of the Mondays. I mean, just personally, I think that you've hit on a lot of the big things that we would be looking at, which is, you know, not everything having web and paper versions of things. I love the idea of events at the schools, especially if we're getting pretty accurate demographic information from that source, that they'll be a good resource in reaching out to different populations. I don't know. Come on, y'all. Any other thoughts?
I was thinking in response to those, maybe this is we're not at this stage yet, but just there is a Spanish speaking church, and maybe that single translated page fact sheet could be dropped off there if they're willing to have it, and, you know, at a table at the back or something. And I know that Taylor and Elena have done some work with the food bank and mentioning that income levels makes it harder for people to participate. If we can go to where they're already at, maybe have a table on a Tuesday or a Friday when people are coming in to get food, maybe they would stop and share some ideas. But I think that what the coverage that you have here of our community sounds good to me. I should have said this is Melanie, or since we're all scattered here.
Thanks. Well, as we go through the next questions, some of these will come up again. So if anything occurs to you, or after the meeting, if you think of anything like that, like knowing about the church and also about the food bank, those are great tips, and those are great ways to reach the community for sure.
The library also has like little preschool programs and stuff. And sometimes I think
Right.
people with really small children are hard to reach because they're just kind of tied down, but maybe that might be a way to go where somebody is at already to get information out and request feedback.
Absolutely. Right, shall we move on?
Yeah, and we can always dig into this a little bit more in the equity lens questions.
Sure.
Great, thanks, Kaylin. Perfect segue. Okay, so yeah, so as mentioned, we've started to think about what equity lens questions you all have already thought about and already developed to help us figure out what questions we want to ask for this project as we develop the process and as we go through the outreach, as well as thinking about the outcomes, the projects that are going to be included in that final plan to make sure that those are equitable as well. So, Kaylin, if you could go to the next slide. You all, I think this was in the agenda. So there's a long list of questions. And so those are kind of broken down. And so what I'm thinking is that we can just walk through these, and then I'll give you all about 3 minutes, which will feel like an eternity on Zoom, but just a few minutes to just have some self-reflection time. And then we can go around. We'll probably start in person first and then go to the committee members who are virtual, and we'll just share out what you're thinking about these equity lens questions, and also just thinking about how this committee wants to be involved, right? So John proposed the idea of where do you want to meet in the schedule? So right now we have kind of almost all of our meetings with you in that understand phase. And so does that feel okay to you in that kind of like we're brainstorming ideas, not only for the process, but also at the early stages of what comes out of the project? Or do you want to be involved kind of more regularly throughout the process? So I think there will be those kind of two questions. How do you want to be involved as the committee? And then how do you feel about these equity lens questions? Okay, so we'll go through these together, and then I'll give you a few minutes, and then we'll talk individually. So some of the equity elements for the public involvement plan that Kaylin was just mentioning, these are questions that you all have developed that we've pulled out that we felt was most appropriate to this process question. So communications, thinking about our audience, thinking about our messaging so that we are very accessible and our language is accessible, making sure that we are going to where people are so that we can reach a range of audiences, and as mentioned, probably only translating a minimal amount into Spanish. And that's our assumption for the languages that are needed, as well as thinking about eliminating barriers for engagement. So, as you all identified, what about care for young children or adult, parents, or, making sure that there's accessible dates and times. And then also, how do we collect the information that people give us? And what type of questions do we ask? And then, of course, circling back and making sure that everyone knows how their input was used through the process. So that's what we're thinking for the PI plan. If we can go to the next slide. When we're thinking about actually working with people, we're thinking about how do we, evaluate ourselves? How do we connect with people, make sure that they're expressing their ideas, encouraging that feedback, encouraging dialogue, again, considering barriers, and reducing those barriers. And so we will, of course, want to tap all of your knowledge, as mentioned, like the libraries and the Spanish speaking church. And then, how can we make sure that the policies and practices that we're going through are inclusive? Okay, if we want to go to the next one. So these are questions we're thinking about specifically for you. And I think we were thinking that this is slightly different because it's how we want to kind of engage with you all. So if you can help us think about tools and techniques that we should be using. So as Kaylin just mentioned, those types of activities that we're planning. If there are specific audiences or groups or, like the library preschool group, if there's a Head Start, things like that, a Facebook group sometimes, things like that can be really helpful for us. Are there, this was a question, I think it was a great one. Is there a trauma that exists, or some background or history that we need to know? That's especially important because you all are connected to the community and may know that information, where we don't have that connection. So that's really important for us. And then we really want to know what you think will be a way for us to hold ourselves accountable, for this outreach. Okay, the next one. And so then in the process for how do we get the projects, right? So how do we think about, what roads or what parking measures, those kind of things. These were the questions, for gathering information, thinking about statistics and our data, and then thinking about how we're actually planning the work, and then the policy development, right? So these are those things that are actually going to really affect people's lives on a daily basis through policies that are a result of this transportation system plan. So how do we consider these questions to make sure that what comes out feels equitable and creates an equitable process?
Hey, Brandy, I'm just going to
yeah.
add something here. I realize I can't raise my hand as a presenter. I just wanted to say these headings, the gathering information and planning and policy development, they're taken directly from your document. And so that's if you need to refer back to the original document that you created, those are the categories. And then so each one of these lists under here is not necessarily comprehensive. They're the ones that we took out that seemed most relevant to this plan. But there are other ones that maybe they didn't seem as applicable. So I just wanted to say that's where some of those came from.
Totally. Thanks, Kaylin. Yeah. And then I think there's one more slide. So this is, thinking about those outcomes and how do we evaluate those and the work product. So, how will this TSP actually contribute to a more equitable access to resources, right? Will there be longer term needs that are met, and specifically thinking about the marginalized groups that are living and working in Estacada? How can we report those findings back and make sure that people, were involved throughout the process? And then thinking about, again, those barriers and how those were overcome or will be overcome with the outcomes that are included in the plan. And then really thinking about, there's also that financial component that John mentioned. And that's an important piece of the policies and the projects that come out of this plan. So I think, yeah, and then how do we measure, is inclusion increasing or decreasing? And I think, is the next one just a question slide? Yeah, okay. So we can either keep this up for reference, or you can all look at your agenda. But I think our main questions for you were really, we're going to take a few minutes for you to just skim back through these. And how does everybody feel with like combining this for a 5-minute if you need to stand up, so we could come back right at 2?
So Christina, Trina, and Kurt have to leave because they have appointments.
Oh, yeah.
So if they have comments prior to 2, if they want to take time now to make those comments before they have to leave.
Great. Yeah. Yeah, so the 2 questions we really want to know are the timing and how you all want to be involved as the DEI committee, and then also do you think that these are the right equity lens questions?
Can we go back to that slide that showed the timeline? Because or is that one that we didn't have that, right?
Don't think that you have that.
Yeah. I mean, that would help. So we can look at that again now that we have a better idea of.
Thanks, Kaylin.
I mean, I personally don't know if we need 3 check-ins in the understand part, but I mean, I think definitely there's going to be a point where we've collected data, and I think somewhere around the draft that might be a good time to do another check-in somewhere in that evaluate process, so we can, take a step back and say, okay, like, do we feel like there are voices missing, or do we need to reevaluate? Is there a different way to get certain populations feedback or something? Or I don't know when that, maybe that is in the end of the understand phase. I don't know, but and go ahead, Trina, you got your hand raised.
Yeah, going back to the one slide when they talked about the history and stuff of Estacada. I've lived here for 30 years, and I know my biggest complaint is I'm being taxed out of here. I moved to Estacada because it was cheaper. 30 years ago, it was cheaper to live out here than it was to Portland. Plus, I didn't want to raise my kids in the city. So I moved out here. Then they started building all these houses. Back in the time when they were building up on Reagan Hill, they said, oh, don't worry, all these new houses, it's great. That's what's going to pay to have us a new poop house, sewage treatment plant. And so don't worry, it's all these new houses, it's great. And I'm like, I don't want new houses. I don't want a new house. But I'm like, okay, we needed a new sewage facility back then. They were talking about upgrading it 30 years ago. Now we've got all these new houses going, and we're going to need a new school pretty soon, more taxes. We still are paying on the taxes from when they built the grade school and upgraded the high school and junior high and River Mill and all of them. We're still paying for that bond. Now we've got the sewer coming in, and that's going to increase our taxes. Then the roads. You're gentrifying Estacada. You're getting rid of the loggers. This is a logging community. And you're gentrifying it basically and getting rid of the people that have lived here for 30 years. We can't afford to live here anymore. That was my statement.
Great, thanks, Trina.
So I think that brings up one really good point. Also, thank you, Trina, that we need to be really careful about choosing, like when we're prioritizing, to be choosing really economical choices, and so that it isn't a burden to our community. You know, if we have to make upgrades to things that are, I know there's a variety of places that we get funding from to do those, but to be really understanding that any choices that we make and any prioritization of projects that we do that affects the people that live here, and to be cautious of, out doing things in too grand of a scale, make sure that it's sufficient, that it's quality, that it's going to last, but that it's also economical for our community. I think maybe that's what would be helpful, Trina.
Yeah, we can't tax everybody out that's lived here forever.
Great. Any other thoughts for people who have to leave early?
Huh?
I think we already lost Christina.
I don't have to leave early, so I'm flexible.
Did I hear Kurt was leaving early? Kurt? Kurt, do you have anything you'd like to add? If I can put you on the spot.
No, the hardest thing is, the population of Estacada obviously is getting more and more elderly. There are a lot more people that are on fixed incomes. Both Trina and I are both on fixed incomes. And a 40, I mean, just think of it. You've got somebody that's on a fixed income, that doesn't make $13,000 a year. $40 on an increase to like what Trina was saying is an impact. Well, we're also not driving as much because of mobility issues. Like this week, I have my second hip replacement in 3 months. So my car and my truck are going to be parked in the driveway 80% more than a lot of other people in town, yet my road taxes are going to be going up just the same. So it's that's something that really scares the hell out of me. We're going to lose a large portion of the people in Estacada because we simply can't afford to live here anymore.
Yeah, thank you.
I think that's why having some of that longitudinal data of the demographics will really tell a story about what populations are growing, or just to understand. I think it'll give a little bit more of a picture of the story.
Well, why don't we open it up? I know, Jessica, you said you maybe have some comments as well.
Yes, I just wanted to start with asking specifically where you would like us to begin with our statements or comments. Can it range from any of the last few slides? Okay.
Yeah, definitely. And then if people are having, if people want to hone in on something, we can definitely do that as well.
Okay. But specifically, you wanted to know about timing and how the DEI wanted to be involved.
Yes.
Okay. Could you go back 1 or 2 slides, or forward 1 or 2 slides? Yeah. One more. One back, sorry. Thank you. I think working on the specifics of these questions is where I would like to be involved more. When for example, when we interact with people, how do we check our own assumptions and biases? And I think starting with open-ended questions would be very helpful. So tell me about your experience with X, Y, and Z. Very similarly to what Kurt and Trina just reported, their experience regarding transportation and taxes within the community of Estacada. And then understanding that there are going to be various experiences, and to understand that our perspectives moving through the world are limited to what we know and what we experience, and to just recognize that we don't know what everybody's experiencing at any given time. And then, yeah, definitely number two, some people might not feel safe or even valued enough to express what their ideas are. So how do we make sure that we keep ourselves accountable in extending that offer to people specifically? I need your feedback. Your feedback is very helpful to me and us as a community, things like that. So this slide is where I think I would specifically want to be more involved in. If I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thank you. Anybody else on when you want to be involved, or maybe some, you can say you want to be involved in the whole thing, and that's totally fine. And we, of course, I think John mentioned this, we want you, of course, to be involved too as a community member. So to express your individual viewpoints as well.
I agree with Erin that perhaps we don't need 3 DEIC sessions right at the start of the project, and we can maybe move one of those further along. But then I also I assume we can reach out. So if we are seeing the process going along and we discuss it during one of our meetings, we can always reach out or give opinions and keep the line of conversation open as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, is Taylor going to be the main contact?
I think so.
Okay.
For the TSP?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I would direct questions regarding the TSP to Taylor.
Yeah.
But if the DEI committee members wanted to email Elena, either one is fine.
Okay.
This is Melanie. I was gonna say that I think maybe moving one of those 3 DEI check-ins so that it falls after the first public open house, but before the second one, maybe they could evaluate how the first one went, and who, even though we feel like we're getting really broad coverage and trying to include everybody, who was missing at that first one. And maybe they could give some input on that to help make the second one include more people.
Great. Any other thoughts? Jenny or Shannon?
A question about the stakeholder group. What will be the makeup of that, and how will you go about creating that group?
Yeah, great question. Kaylin or John for the city?
So I could share off the top of my, I don't have the roster in front of me, but we have that group that roster almost done and recruited. And so I'm just going to try to think of all of the different stakeholders that are represented there. So we've got school district, the Todos Juntos group that works in the schools, the food bank. There is a bicycle. Can you help me, Elena? What's that?
They're the ones who organized the bike ride that went over to Detroit. That is not happening since the fire, but so kind of more the bike tourism and the bike the recreational bicyclists.
Yeah, the bike perspective. There's a like Clean Rivers kind of environmental conservation group. Who am I?
Transit.
forgetting? So we don't yet have someone confirmed from the Sandy Transit District, but
And
hopefully we
then
will.
ODOT,
ODOT.
Clackamas County.
Yeah, so your government agencies, so ODOT, Clackamas County, the Department of Land Conservation and Development, which is basically the state planning agency. Did I say the school district contact is specifically their transportation coordinator? We've got the fire district.
There's some general people who live in Estacada. We have a handful
Right.
of those. Are they on that? Is that committee?
I'm not sure.
If they're
I'm
on
not
that.
sure if we've got any just sort of like
So
community
this
member
is-
at large.
This is almost more of like a technical type of an advisory committee.
Right. Well, a lot of the members are sort of, well, yeah, I don't know, maybe you would call it a technical advisory committee.
Is there like the downtown Estacada? Do they have,
Yes,
yeah,
kind of. And there's a connection.
Maybe that would be the one
Yeah,
sort of
yeah.
community member at large.
Yeah, one of the DEC members' husbands. He regularly comes to the meetings, so he's, knows what's going on with the DEC committee. And then you have a planning commission.
We've got planning commission and city council
Mhm.
participation. So yeah, I'd be happy to provide the actual list to the committee if you guys want to see who all is on there and suggest anyone that may be missing.
I mean, there's so many aspects of the plan, right? Like, I mean, there's like the tourism and business side, like how do we get people to easily be able to access what the town has to offer? There's like businesses looking at customers and their employees and the transportation needs. And then there's all the community needs for just livability and ease of getting around. So I don't know who the largest employers are in Estacada, but I'd be curious, like, if there's some voice represented there on the transportation needs, like as we get bigger and people aren't able to move closer, it's hard to move out here. Like, are their needs being met also?
That's a good idea. Also potentially someone from the industrial campus who might be shipping large amounts of whatever they produce.
Now
And
we
I think-
oh, go ahead.
Sorry. So I think also maybe when you send that list, that might also kind of dovetail into the idea of who are we connecting with for the community, because sometimes the advisory committees, you do want some of that technical knowledge, but we can't always have everyone on a committee, but we can always reach out to people or groups through our community outreach so that we can make sure that their voices are heard during our workshops and other avenues. So let's make sure we get a big list going. If you have ideas, let's start tracking those for the outreach perspective too.
Yeah, thanks, Brandy. And then I did get the roster pulled up here. And the folks I was forgetting are the community center, our own public works department, the library, Parks and Recreation committee member, and also the former mayor. And then I think I said these last few. Yep.
And
Oh.
we just updated the bicycle and pedestrian chapters just a few years ago. So are we am I correct to think that we're specifically focusing on vehicle, like streets for cars and, is that right? We're not going to delve necessarily back into the active transportation portion of it, or is it?
Yeah, we wanted to bring that work into this new update. So
Okay.
most of the new stuff is probably more, transit auto oriented. And then
Okay.
we wanted to, there's some areas of the city we needed to extend some of those recommendations for active transportation into.
Okay.
Not to say we couldn't refine some of that, but we think a lot of that work was done pretty recently.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Shannon.
Hi, I'm sorry, I am here and I'm listening. I apologize, I had an internet issue, so I'm gonna be watching the video to catch up on all of the info shared here. But I am here. I'm just being a little bit quiet and I apologize for that. Just wanted to let you know.
Thanks. Yeah, and I think that's a good point, that if there are things that come up, I think you can send them to either Taylor or Elena, and that'll get back to us.
Y'all are super quiet today.
It must be this Monday. I don't know. Yeah, everybody's tired out.
We're tired of cloudy weather.
Would it be useful? I know some people had to leave early. Would it be useful to take a few minutes and then kind of check back in, or do you feel like you've kind of like said, like said it all for today? Shannon, I see your hands raised.
Sorry to ask questions that have probably been already asked, but can somebody, if any, just reiterate like what we wanted to be working on? I might have missed it. You're asking us to what questions did you have for us? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, you're totally fine. You're totally fine. So, the main thing that I'm hoping you all can give feedback on is how you as the DEI committee really want to get involved. And so part of that is timing. And so far, other people have said that they'd really like to be involved after the first workshop, before the second workshop, to see how the feedback goes and make sure people are represented, and find out who was missing from that first round of outreach. And so maybe we move one of our committee meetings after that first workshop. But are there other points that you want to be involved with? And then also the list of questions from the equity lenses that you all produced, they're in the agenda. And is there anything missing, any questions that we should be asking during this process?
Okay, great, thank you. Yes, I'm gonna need to watch over the video, and then I think it's good to be involved for the first workshop before the second. I agree with that. Because there's a lot I need to catch up on. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely.
I might add, so selfishly, since I'm going to be developing the public involvement plan, I'm particularly interested in hearing from this group about, as you think about tools and techniques for reaching the people of Estacada, as somebody coming in from the outside, we have, notions, and we have great contacts at the city and people who have connections like the ones we've already talked about. But what I'd love to know is, like, where do people go? How do we meet people where they are? What are the activities that they participate in? Are there, like Randy said, are there Facebook groups that people use? Is there a bulletin board that everybody stops by? So as we think about where we put our posters and how we advertise our surveys, I'd love to get your feedback on that. Maybe, oh, nobody likes online surveys, everybody likes postcards. That's good feedback too. So I just wanted to put that question out there and see if there's anything that springs to people's mind.
I will say in my attempts at trying to get people to engage, it's very hit or miss when it comes to online surveys. I think postcards actually sounds like a great idea, because I think if it's tangible sent to them, it's a lot easier for them to do as opposed to, oh yeah, I'll click that link later and then losing it in their feed or whatever.
Great, thanks, Jenny. Trina. Oh, we can't hear you, Trina.
There we go. Sorry.
Yeah, that's fine.
We're headed to the doctor, so Kurt's listening, but we're on my phone doing the Zoom meeting. Facebook groups were great. There's like 4 main ones in Estacada, and I put out stuff there, and I usually get like 100 responses at least, you know.
Great.
So I like the Facebook because people, they're not afraid to say whatever they think. So you get some pretty, you know what I mean? So you actually learn what they're thinking because they're not afraid to tell you. So.
Yeah, and I think, you know, one of the things, that's a great point, Trina, and I think it's good to know that you have 4 groups. Sometimes it's hard for us if we're not part of the groups to distribute the information. So we might call on you all to see if you can share, you know, the event or share the information too. So we might have an ask for you at some point. Shannon.
I agree with the Facebook groups. Also, I was wondering if another site that might be helpful would be the Next Door site that reaches another group of people that might not be on Facebook.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Does seem like the pandemic has really shifted all of the gathering spots online. Because other than that, like it's like the library, the schools, the I don't know much about the community center and senior center services in town, but I mean, looking at those major hubs of the normal city life, I think are good places to kind of to work out of. Also, post office, you know. And there's like, is there a better description of the areas that the different tracks are covering? Because I know it said like, you know, there's like the one main one that's Estacada, but then it also pulls from 2 other areas. And I was like looking at the map and like, I don't know exactly.
Yeah.
Is that, I'm guessing Eagle Creek up
You
to
know,
11 into Sandy maybe a little bit, and then I'm not sure.
I don't know if you can see my mouse. I believe
Yes.
this is 26.
Okay.
This white line. So this is probably Sandy. So this doesn't pull as far north as Sandy, but yeah, so Eagle Creek to the north. Yeah, apologize. The map was kind of low detail.
Yeah.
This might have already been answered, but I was wondering if there will be a community question and answer info session in the town hall. I like those. They seem to attract a lot of people as well.
Do you like the like sit down Q&A, hear other people's questions style?
No, that they the last one I went to, they had different tables with different information and different people explaining different specific parts of exactly. I think they were talking about housing at that one.
Yeah, where you kind of go around the room to different like stations.
I think that pulls in people as well.
Okay, great. Yeah, we are thinking 2 kind of workshops, and I don't know if Kaylin, if you've determined the exact format yet. So
No, not quite. So as we move through the process, as John mentioned, we're going to be doing activities in person and online so that we're increasing the opportunities for people to participate. And the exact nature of those activities is still to be determined, but typically, one workshop will be involved, during the end of the understanding phase. It'll be focused on, did we get it right? Do we understand the community, the issues that are impacting you? And there are usually lots of opportunities for people to mark on maps and to indicate, no, you missed this problem, or you should think about this. And then the next workshop, to the extent we don't have to decide right away exactly what that looks like, sometimes we can be more responsive to the kinds of issues that people want to focus on. But definitely they will be an opportunity for the community to come to talk to the team, to understand why these proposed solutions to these issues are the way they are, to ask questions about what the impacts of those solutions are going to be, the costs, and how it's going to change the transportation system. So yes, definitely be opportunities to talk in person. The exact tools, whether they're going to be a presentation to people seated at an audience, a little more static. Typically we tend to go more for something that lets people show up when they want, when it's convenient for them, and talk to somebody one-on-one. But we can take feedback, and we can develop that as we get closer to those events.
Thank you. That answers my question. Perfect.
Great.
I definitely think low stakes types events are better for just getting people's feedback. The event that Shannon was talking about with the housing needs analysis, I think the thing that was most impactful about that event was the people who were tabling had the opportunities to connect with each other. I don't know, and Melanie and City Hall folks, you could talk. I don't know if there was a big community participation, but to me, it was really effective for getting the people in the room that needed opportunities to connect, to share services and ideas and opportunities. But as soon as the podium came out, I think, and people had to formally, stand up to say anything, I think that really it quiets people down. So having really casual opportunities to share their thoughts, and like both verbally and written, and like go away with this email address that you can, share your thoughts later, but giving people all of those different opportunities to share information is really critical.
So I think what Shannon was talking about was the housing needs analysis meeting. But I think what you're talking about was the What's Up Estacada, where we had different community groups and city committees together. And I definitely agree with you. When it got time for people to stand up to the podium, the room cleared out. But with the housing needs meeting, most of those people stayed after the kind of one-on-one tables.
I think if it's more of a hot topic, people are less afraid. If they feel very strongly about it, then they bolster their courage. But if they're feeling a little insecure about it, then it's harder to ask those questions or make statements. But I think a combination is good.
The other difference is,
Shannon.
oh, I'm
I'm
sorry,
so
Shannon.
sorry. What's Up Estacada was a great format. I did enjoy being able to write them down as well as talk to people. So yeah, I was kind of talking about my brain was kind of putting those two together. I'm sorry I didn't press the hand raise button. Sometimes it gets sticky. So apologies about that.
No problem.
Is there somebody who's was involved in that What's Up Estacada event? It might be somebody we could pick their brain.
Oh, that's the city.
That was the city?
That's us.
So
Well done.
Yeah,
Great.
yeah, and
Well,
that's
fun
that is a quarterly informal event series that we have just kicked off. So we've only had one, but we are planning for the next one to be August 15th, I think. It's a Monday. And we'll be doing those quarterly. So it's really for the city and, all of, our other partner agencies and probably also community organizations to just come and have tables and talk about what's going on, answer questions from the public. But that's definitely something that we would want to include, information on this project and opportunities for members of the public to give feedback on wherever we're at in the project process. So we'll plan on that being one of our sort of engagement methods for sure.
Yeah, I think another way to think about this is, what does a successful end product look to the DEI committee, right? So at the end of this process, if we come to you, in that recommendation and adoption phase, and we say, here's this final plan, and here are all these projects, what do you think how will that feel if it's successful to you? Like, are there certain questions that we've answered? Are there certain people who are represented in that? Maybe we can go with Trina first, since I know you're driving and maybe you have to jump off soon.
As long as it's fair to everybody and we don't make it too cost prohibitive.
Mm-hmm.
That's about, I just want to see a few more stop signs put in, and lights put in so I can get out on the highway. That would make me happy.
I hear ya.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Trina.
Something that would make me really happy is if we get to the end and we don't have people all of a sudden say like, hey, I didn't get to give my input. Like, where's my voice in this? We don't want that to happen.
Mm-hmm. Great. Anybody else?
I think along with what has already been said, in addition to that would be, can we articulate the reasons behind these decisions? Does everything have a purpose? And what are those reasonings behind that? And not having any I guess you can't really prevent gray area, but the gray area is a lot less considerable when identifying purpose and reasons.
Yeah, and so just to clarify, so for like a project there's a clear explanation why that project was selected and maybe the purpose behind that project or that policy, that's what you're saying?
Yeah, and then the decisions that come of that, like why would we, like the reasonings behind being very prudent with our budget and very specific with why we choose to spend money in this way or that way. Yeah, essentially.
Great.
And that goes with that, the part that was pulled out of the equity lens about using, common language that everybody can understand, but just like pulling the bureaucracy and the alphabet soup of all the acronyms and all of those things out of it.
Yeah. And as planners, we love to do those acronyms. So you all will just have to keep us honest with that.
I think one important thing is making sure that community education is important, especially at the beginning of the process, because I know we just recently, or I guess we're still working on the housing needs analysis. And it seemed like towards the beginning, people didn't entirely understand what it was about. And they kind of came out hostile, like this is them trying to grow with the town, but they didn't understand, like, we have to do this, whether the town's growing or not, we have to discover what housing people need. So I think making sure that people understand why we're going about this process, and this isn't, we're not gonna build a bunch of bike lanes and turn us into Portland. Just kind of help people understand that this is infrastructure, it needs to be updated, and we need to have a plan before it's too late, so that people aren't necessarily hostile from the beginning.
Yeah. do you think people resonate or feel comfortable with like, hey, we want to just like plan for the future, you know, the next 20 years? Let's think about this. Do you think that kind of message resonates well in Estacada?
Yes-ish, but I think there's also that idea of like understanding the practicality of planning and spending some money now saves us from spending a lot of money if the roads completely break down or if we can't meet the needs of the growing population safely. Like there's a little bit of that, like what the flip side of doing this process could look like, you know, sharing that best and worst case scenario.
Mm-hmm.
And the like, just like the what's in it for me type. I think that's for any process or any project you're doing in any town, is that people need to understand why it's valuable for them and why they would want to participate in it.
Mm-hmm.
So you're saying, so showing the benefit of the cost now versus the cost of not acting, and showing that really plainly in a way that people understand. So
Yeah,
they,
I think that's part of it. Yeah.
so they feel like it's, you know, their decision,
Mm-hmm.
not someone else making decisions for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that what you just said, Shannon, is and Aaron, I think is really interesting and something we should definitely consider about our messaging. But just how can the people who live in Estacada plan for the future they want for Estacada, right? I think that's kind of what I'm hearing you say. Okay. Any other thoughts of what a successful transportation system plan might look like for you all on the committee?
Just one more thing. I just think showing diversified investment in the types of transportation so that it's not super car heavy, but allows opportunities for all different types of transportation to sort of have that equal focus, or equitable, maybe probably not equal, but equitable focus.
It was probably already covered, but I'd be interested in elderly transportation because I have elderly friends who have a hard time getting around in our small town.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yeah.
I totally lied when I said I only had one more thing to say. That just made me think about the sustainability aspect. And I think playing up off of the beauty of Estacada, which is something I think everybody can agree on. We're in such a beautiful setting, and that linking that with sustainability, I think is a good, I would like to see that in the plan.
Great. Anyone who's there in person?
It's all staff here in
Oh,
person.
sorry. Okay. Just thought I better double check.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you. And so just as a reminder, we're going to take everything we've heard today. Kaylin will think about how this can fit into the public involvement plan. So if you do have additional ideas or groups or locations, like he said, where should we hang up some flyers? That is all really helpful information. And as we said, there may be an ask for you if you're already on some of those groups. If we can send you something at certain points in time, that would be really helpful. So that's how we're going to kind of use what we collected today. And if you have anything, please send it to Taylor or Elena so that we can get that. And I think that is it. Kaylin or John or anyone there at the city, do you have anything else for next steps or anything else you want to add?
Yeah, next steps wise, based on what I was hearing about how you wanted to use your meetings and moving one to later, my recommendation would be to move the next one we were going to have to later in the process, because we're largely going to be talking with our stakeholder group. It's their kickoff, kind of like this was for you. Plus, we'll be talking about goals and objectives a lot. So you probably got a third or more of their agenda already for that meeting. So I would push that one to kind of where that third S is. So your next steps, at least as far as next meeting, would be, I guess, where that third D is. So at that point, we would have not only goals and objectives, but we'd have a robust discussion about current and future needs. And I think also kind of one of my parting words here as we venture into the TSP process for you is think about process and outcomes. Again, as we kind of continue to hold up that equity lens, it's could we be doing more to get everybody at the table in this process? Because we can always refine as we go, right? Learn and refine. And the other, again, on the outcomes, especially as we get into that evaluate stage, it's, are we going to be achieving equitable outcomes, as we had intended, or are we missing something?
Wonderful. Well, thank you all. I think that we can maybe hand it back to you all as a committee to do what you all need to do.
My yappy dog might be barking, but do we need to see if we have any citizens in the hopper?
No attendees, sorry.
Okay. Do we need to give people an opportunity to make comment, or shall we just
Yeah, if there's any of the committee members that have comments that might not be related to this, but just general comments, we give them a chance for that.
All right. Trina, Shannon, Jenny, Jessica, or Kurt via Trina. Does anybody have anything that you would like to bring up or share?
No additional comments for me.
I'm good. So's Kurt. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you for including us in this process, and also welcome Mara.
Thank you.
All right. I don't have any comments. Also, just like what Jenny said, though, thank you. This is really important work, and we're all learning our parts in these processes. So thank you for letting us learn alongside you. I have nothing else. So I guess with that, we will call this this meeting adjourned at 2:40. Is it 2:42? 2:42.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, Brandy. Thanks, Kaylin.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, committee.
Thank you. Goodbye.